The atmosphere in Seattle during the late autumn of 1960 was defined by a heavy, pervasive dampness that seemed to seep into the very marrow of the city's bones. The University District, usually a hub of academic quietude, transformed at night into a landscape of sharp contrasts, where the amber glow of street lamps struggled against the encroaching fog rolling in from the Puget Sound. This was a city of grit and industry, populated by men who wore their labor on their sleeves. Thick denim, heavy wool coats, and boots caked with the mud of the shipyards. Amidst this backdrop of rugged practicality, a 20-year-old Bruce Lee moved with a discordant elegance. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal grey Italian suit, a garment that appeared almost alien in this environment. The jacket was cut slim, hugging his shoulders with surgical precision, while his white shirt was starched to a crispness that defied the humidity. His shoes, black leather Oxfords, clicked against the wet pavement with a rhythmic, deliberate sound that signaled a man who was not merely walking, but moving with a profound sense of purpose. To any casual observer, he looked like a young intellectual, or perhaps a scion of a wealthy family, a person who had never known the rough and tumble reality of a street confrontation. This perception was a tactical error that several men were about to make, a mistake rooted in the shallow observation of surface-level aesthetics rather than the recognition of internal compression. Bruce's choice of attire was never accidental. He viewed the suit as a laboratory for his evolving martial theories. He wanted to know if his movements were truly universal, or if they were dependent on the freedom of loose-fitting silk robes. He believed that a martial artist should be a functional human being in any setting, capable of defending his life while maintaining the dignity of a gentleman. As he navigated the dim alleyways that served as shortcuts between the university and his modest living quarters, his awareness was not focused on his own reflection in the shop windows, but on the shifting dynamics of the shadows around him. He could feel the change in the air, the subtle displacement of wind that occurs when bodies move with predatory intent. He didn't need to turn his head to know that 3 men had stepped out from behind a stack of shipping crates near a brick warehouse. He could hear the heavy, uneven breathing of men who relied on size rather than stamina, and he could smell the faint, sharp odor of cheap beer and wet leather. The leader of the trio was a massive individual, a man whose physical presence was intended to be an insurmountable wall. He stood 6'2", weighing perhaps 230 pounds, with hands the size of dinner plates and a jawline thickened by years of taking punches in back alley brawls. His 2 companions were smaller but no less aggressive, flanking him like scavengers waiting for a kill. They saw Bruce's slim frame, roughly 145 pounds, and they saw the expensive fabric of his suit, and they felt a surge of class-based resentment. The big man stepped directly into Bruce's path, his boots splashing into a shallow puddle, sending dirty water toward Bruce's polished shoes. Bruce stopped, but he didn't tense up in the way a victim does. He didn't hunch his shoulders or lower his gaze. Instead, he simply adjusted his center of gravity, sinking his weight almost imperceptibly into his heels, his hands hanging naturally at his sides, fingers relaxed but ready. The big man spoke, his voice a low, guttural rumble that carried the threat of impending violence. He commented on the suit, his words dripping with a forced sarcasm, asking Bruce if he was looking for a fashion show or if he had simply taken a wrong turn on his way to a cocktail party. Bruce's response was a study in psychological neutrality. He didn't offer an insult, nor did he offer an apology. He spoke with a level, calm tone, stating that he was merely walking home and that there was plenty of room on the sidewalk for everyone. This lack of a predictable reaction, either fear or bravado, agitated the big man. He was used to people stuttering or lashing out, both of which gave him a reason to escalate. Bruce's stillness was a void that the bully didn't know how to fill. The big man took a step closer, invading Bruce's personal space, until the scent of his unwashed leather jacket was overwhelming. He raised a hand, not yet a fist, but a grasping claw intended to seize Bruce's lapel and assert physical dominance. In the microseconds before the hand made contact, Bruce's brain was performing a cold, mechanical analysis of the situation. he saw the big man's weight was committed to his front foot, leaving his balance vulnerable to a sudden shift. He saw the two companions closing in from the sides, their eyes darting toward Bruce's pockets, anticipating a quick robbery. Bruce knew that in a 3-on-1 scenario, the fight had to be won before it truly began. He didn't wait for the hand to close on his suit. He utilized the core principle of what would become Jeet Kune, the Intercepting Fist. As the big man's arm reached its apex, Bruce exploded forward. It wasn't a lunging movement, but a sudden, violent expansion of energy from his center. His lead left hand didn't block the reaching arm. It bypassed it entirely, his fingers flickering out in a Bai-Jong strike that targeted the big man's eyes. The movement was so fast that the human eye could barely register it as a blur. The big man's head snapped back instinctively, his hands flying up to his face as his vision went dark, and a searing pain erupted across his brow. The suddenness of the strike sent a shockwave through the two companions. They hadn't seen the hit. They only saw their leader suddenly reeling backward as if struck by an invisible bolt of lightning. The man to Bruce's left, fueled by a mixture of panic and rage, swung a heavy, looping right hook aimed at Bruce's temple. Bruce didn't retreat. He understood that in a suit, range was his best friend, but confinement was his reality. He stepped inside the arc of the punch, his back brushing against the rough brick of the warehouse wall. As the punch whistled harmlessly past his ear, Bruce's right hand shot out in a pak sao, or slapping hand, pinning the attacker's arm against his own chest. With the man's momentum neutralized, Bruce delivered a short, sharp sidekick to the side of the man's knee. The mechanics of the strike were perfect. The rotation of the hip, the locking of the ankle, and the direct application of force against a joint that was never meant to bend sideways. A sickening, wet crack echoed through the alley as the man's leg buckled. He collapsed into the mud, his screams muffled by the splashing rain. The third attacker, seeing his friend crippled in a matter of seconds, pulled a short, blunt instrument, a piece of lead pipe, from his waistband. He didn't approach with the confidence of a brawler anymore. He approached with the desperation of a man who realized he was facing a predator. He swung the pipe in a downward diagonal arc, hoping to catch Bruce across the shoulder. Bruce's reaction was a masterpiece of spatial economy. He didn't jump away, he simply tilted his torso a few inches to the right, the pipe missing his charcoal grey sleeve by a fraction of an inch. As the attacker overextended, Bruce stepped into the man's blind side. He gripped the man's wrist with a tan sao, dispersing hand, and using the man's own forward energy, spun him around. Before the man could regain his footing, Bruce delivered a rapid-fire burst of 3 vertical punches to the base of the man's skull and the back of his neck. The strikes were not designed to be cinematic. They were designed to shut down the nervous system. The man's grip on the pipe loosened. His knees hit the pavement, and he slumped forward, unconscious before his chest touched the ground. Now, the leader had recovered. The initial blinding sting had faded into a dull, throbbing ache, and his vision was beginning to clear, though his eyes were bloodshot and weeping. He saw his 2 friends incapacitated, and the sight transformed his arrogance into a pure, unadulterated, murderous rage. He didn't care about the suit or the money anymore. He wanted to destroy the person who had embarrassed him. He let out a roar that was more animal than human, and charged at Bruce with his head down, intending to use his superior mass to tackle Bruce and grind him into the brick wall. This was the moment where the physics of the fight reached their climax. Bruce stood his ground, his feet planted in a narrow but deep stance, his breathing coming in short, controlled inhalations through his nose. He waited until the big man was less than 3 feet away, the momentum of 230 pounds of flesh and bone hurtling toward him like a runaway train. At the very last possible instant, Bruce performed a circular step, a graceful, fluid pivot that redirected his entire body out of the path of the charge. As the big man stumbled past, his balance compromised by the empty air where his target had been, Bruce reached out and hooked his hand behind the big man's neck, pulling him downward while simultaneously driving his own knee upward into the man's midsection. The impact was profound. The air was forced out of the big man's lungs in a violent, wheezing spray of saliva. He doubled over, gasping for breath, his hands clutching his stomach as he tried to remain upright. But Bruce was not finished. He stepped in close, so close that the fabric of his suit jacket rubbed against the man's leather coat. He began a sequence of chain punches, the signature Linsil Dai Da, simultaneous attack and defense. His fists moved in a vertical, rolling motion, hitting the big man's chest, jaw, and throat with the relentless cadence of a pneumatic hammer. Each strike was calculated. Bruce wasn't just hitting a target, he was hitting through it. He felt the vibration of each impact traveling up his arm and into his shoulder, a perfect alignment of bone and muscle. The big man was being kept upright only by the sheer volume of the punches hitting him. He was like a ragdoll caught in a whirlwind. His head snapped left and right, his teeth clattering together, his brain bouncing against the inside of his skull. Bruce's focus was so intense that the rest of the world, the rain, the shadows, the distant sound of a car engine, seemed to vanish. There was only the rhythm of the strike and the tactile feedback of the leather jacket under his knuckles. Finally, sensing the man's energy had completely bottomed out, Bruce transitioned into the finale. He dropped his weight low, coiled his hips, and delivered a final, devastating punch to the man's solar plexus. This wasn't a long-range swing. It was a short, explosive burst of power that originated from the floor, traveled through his legs, and exited through his lead fist. The big man's body reacted as if it had been hit by a heavy piece of timber. He was lifted off his heels for a fraction of a second before being slammed backward into a pile of wooden pallets. The wood splintered under his weight, the sound of breaking timber punctuating the end of the struggle. The leader lay there, tangled in the broken slats, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull in a single breath of air. He looked up at Bruce, his eyes wide with a newfound terrifying clarity. He saw the young man in the suit standing there, his posture as straight and composed as it had been 5 minutes ago. There was no sweat on Bruce's brow, no blood on his hands, and not a single tear in the fabric of his charcoal jacket. The fight had been a total demolition of the ego, a physical manifestation of the idea that skill, when refined to a certain point, becomes indistinguishable from magic. Bruce didn't say a word. He didn't gloat, and he didn't check to see if the men were still alive. He knew exactly how much damage he had dealt. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, folded silk handkerchief. With a calm, methodical grace, he wiped a few droplets of muddy water from his right sleeve, and then buffed a small scuff on his left shoe. He adjusted his tie, ensuring the knot was perfectly centered, and then smoothed the lapels of his jacket. The silence in the alley was heavy, broken only by the whimpering of the man with the broken knee and the distant, rhythmic dripping of water from a rusty gutter. The few onlookers who had been watching from the safety of the street corner had long since vanished, terrified by the efficiency of the violence they had witnessed. They had come to see a mugging. They had stayed to witness a transformation. As Bruce turned to leave, his movements were as fluid and unhurried as if he were walking into a library. He didn't look back at the wreckage he had left behind. He was already analyzing the encounter, thinking about the way his jacket had slightly restricted his shoulder rotation during the third chain punch, and how he might adjust his tailor's next cut to allow for even more freedom of movement. To Bruce, the fight was not an end in itself, but a data point in a lifelong experiment. He had proven that the suit was not a cage, but a camouflage. He had demonstrated that the most dangerous man in the room is not the one who screams for attention or displays his scars, but the one who can dismantle a threat with the same quiet precision that a watchmaker uses to repair a spring. He emerged from the alley back onto the main street, the neon signs of the university district reflecting in the dark fabric of his suit. He looked like any other young man heading home after a late night of study or work. The rain continued to fall, a soft, persistent grey veil that washed away the blood and the dirt from the pavement, leaving the city looking clean and indifferent. But the story of the man in the charcoal suit would not be washed away. It would circulate through the gyms, the docks, and the bars of Seattle, a whispered warning to those who believed that size was the only metric of power. It became a piece of urban folklore, a testament to the night that the docks of Seattle met the ghost of the future. Bruce Lee walked on, his pace steady, his mind clear, and his suit perfectly pressed. He had learned what he needed to learn that night. He had tested the boundaries of his art and found that they were as limitless as his own discipline. As his silhouette disappeared into the fog, the only evidence that anything had happened at all was the lingering silence in the alley and the broken wood of the pallets. A stark reminder that you should never, under any circumstances, underestimate a man who treats his clothing with the same respect as his weapon. The Seattle street lesson was over, and the world was one step closer to meeting the dragon. Though for now, he was content to be the man in the suit, walking quietly through the rain, his secrets tucked away behind a starched white collar and a perfectly tailored jacket.